We're very happy to welcome you in this introductory webinar organized by Université Paris-Saclay, by Terre and Cité, by the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, by the Nature Conservancy, and also EIC, Climate-KIC. I'm sorry for the acronyms, it's an European Initiative on Climate. So the theme of the webinar, as you have seen on the screen, is Climate and Biodiversity Solutions, Agricultural and Natural Spaces, Keys to Resilience. So big and vast program. This is an introductory webinar. We're going to talk about that later, but it's going to lead to other webinars and also an open discussion at the end of this webinar that you can all take part of. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well is actually you can ask your questions about the webinar and our experts that we're going to see on the stage very, very soon, with the channel, the chat channel on the platform. So we will use those questions. We will ask those questions to our guests as well. We have a vast program for 1 hour and 30 minutes. We're going to talk, as we mentioned, about climate. We're going to talk about biodiversity. We're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about peri-urban location and spaces. With two case studies, on one side, Paris-Saclay and the plateau, as we say in French, and on the other side, the Santa Clara Valley. And we're going to try to confront those two approaches to see make comparisons and also all the differ regarding those global challenges and global environmental challenges. For this, I'm going to be with a very distinguished guest that I'm going to introduce very soon. I'm going to actually let them present themselves, but they're going to help in terms of the first part of this webinar, which is going to be, we're going to try to understand the main stakes, what's at stakes, and the main challenges for this, basically, how do we address those big issues in those different territories. So I'm going to call Paul Ledley, maybe to introduce himself first.
Hi, I'm Paul Ledley. I'm a professor at the Université Paris-Saclay. I work in an ecology lab and work on the impacts of climate change and other global change impacts on terrestrial diversity. And I'm an author on IPBES assessments.
Okay, Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Schloss. I'm a senior scientist at the Nature Conservancy based in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. I focus on multi-benefit conservation planning and climate change adaptation. And in my work, I create decision support tools to encourage the use of biodiversity, natural resource, and climate change information in land use decisions in urbanizing landscapes.
Nathalie.
Good evening, I'm Nathalie Denoblet. I'm a climatologist at the Université Paris-Saclay. I'm a specialist of land-atmosphere interactions and how land use changes affect climate at both regional and global scales.
Louise.
Hi, my name is Louise JACKSON, and I'm a retired professor and cooperative extension specialist in the Department of Land, Air, and Water Resources at University of California at Davis.
And
I'm an agricultural. Go ahead.
Sorry, Louise, I thought you were finished. Romain.
Oui, bonjour, je suis Romain MELOT, je suis chercheur à l'Université Paris-Saclay et je travaille sur les politiques publiques locales concernant la gouvernance des terres agricoles.
Thank you so much, all of you, and I apologize, Louise, to interrupt. You're going to have, all of you, we're going to have something like 5 minutes to kind of present your own issues and the big issues that we're going to face to better understand the second part of the webinar. So I guess we're going to start with Paul, who's going to explain with some slides what are the issues for him.
So thank you very much, Fabrice. So I'm going to start the session by providing an overview of the biodiversity crisis, the causes, and particularly focusing on its solutions. And I'm going to be focusing on mostly global and regional scales, although I'll talk a little bit about implementation at local scales. And I'm going to be mostly relying on recent assessments that have come from IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Okay. So what these assessments tell us is that biodiversity is in crisis. And if you look on the left-hand side of this slide, I want you to focus on one number, and that's the 25% of species at extinction risk. So this is just one example, but of the species that are well studied, we know that about a quarter of those species are threatened with extinction. And when we scale that up to the globe, we think that roughly about 1 million species are threatened with extinction. And that's really serious. And we know why. Especially for terrestrial biodiversity, the main drivers of biodiversity loss are land use change, followed by direct exploitation, so things like forestry, then climate change, then pollution and invasive species. And then underlying that, we know what the indirect drivers are. And for terrestrial biodiversity, it's agriculture that's the primary cause of loss of biodiversity at global and regional scales, and frequently at local scales. But urbanization, even though it's not as important at global scales as agriculture, it's rapidly growing as a cause of biodiversity loss. And in many places, it's the primary cause of biodiversity loss. Now, agriculture is the primary cause of biodiversity loss because it contributes to habitat loss and fragmentation, but also because of the way that land is managed. It contributes to climate change, so it's responsible for about 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and it contributes to pollution, particularly through pesticides and fertilizer use. Okay. And that loss of biodiversity is important not only because of its intrinsic values, but because it's also important for our well-being. So for example, natural ecosystems are really important, for example, for sequestering carbon, and they actually help mitigate climate change. Now, the example that I've chosen here, there's lots of examples that I could have chosen. The example I've chosen here is pollination. So 3/4 of global food crops, types of global food crops, depend on pollinators, worth several hundred billions of dollars per year. And at the same time, both managed pollinators and wild insect pollinators are either having experienced severe losses or declines in Europe and in North America. So this loss in biodiversity is having a direct impact on our well-being. And that may be a bit depressing, all that, but one of the key messages from the best assessments as well is that it's not too late, and that bold action can restore this biodiversity and ecosystem services that it provides. But it can't be just small action. It has to be really transformative. And they have identified a number of places where we need this transformative change. And food systems in cities are particularly important. Food systems, we need much more biodiversity friendly agriculture, but that has to be accompanied by changes in diets and reduced food loss, and even more fundamental changes in our financial system that puts too much emphasis on harmful subsidies. In cities, this needs to be things like sustainable urban planning and nature-based solutions. Okay. And that all sounds good, but it's really hard to do in practice. And so one of the things that we have to do collectively is see how we can actually put this in action at local scales. One of the ways to do it is to co-construct solutions, and peri-urban areas are a really interesting place to do that. And that is because of the intense pressure on land in peri-urban areas, frequently coming from both agriculture and urbanization. And they're also really interesting because there's also intense pressure to find solutions for these pressures. With Terre, Cité, a research consortium called Basque is working intensively to do this co-construction. One of that's through creating a dialogue, and I've given an example of here of using scenarios to facilitate dialogues that we did in 2015. But we've been doing regular workshops to co-construct research since we started this research consortium in 2013. And on the right-hand part of this slide, you see that we've actually developed more than 15 co-constructed projects since we started this. And I've just given a few examples here of boosting local recycling of organic material to improve soil health, including biodiversity and carbon storage, or fostering agrobiodiversity. Now, Romain MELOT will be talking more about some of these local actions. What's really important now is that this all has to be scaled up. We can't just be satisfied with this occurring at local scales. So we need to share experiences, we need to learn from others, and that's the real importance of this discussion that we're having today between Paris and California. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And we're going to take away the fact that there are some solutions that we're going to think about and work on. Carrie, please.
The San Francisco Bay Area is a rapidly urbanizing and growing region. The first image is overlooking Silicon Valley in the south of the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, we are experiencing a current crisis in housing shortage, and there is a need to accommodate 2 million more people in the next decade, along with the housing, infrastructure, and energy needs to support that growth. The Bay Area is also a global biodiversity hotspot. It supports a range of habitats from coast redwoods to serpentine grasslands, and is home to many threatened and endangered species like this checker spot butterfly and tiger salamander. These habitats that support biodiversity also provide benefits to Bay Area communities by provisioning clean drinking water, sequestering air pollutants, and providing recreation opportunities, producing food, mitigating climate change, and enhancing resilience to floods and sea level rise. In the past, growth and development has been at the expense of biodiversity and nature, but we can change that trajectory if we can integrate biodiversity, nature, and the benefits they provide people into the planning process from the start, giving them a seat at the table when decisions are made. This will ensure that biodiversity is valued and protected along with the benefits that open space provides communities. We created the Bay Area Greenprint to remove barriers for integrating nature into planning. It reports the biodiversity and connectivity values along with the multiple benefits that nature provides. It is freely accessible and easy to use, and the communication is tailored to practitioners like transportation and water infrastructure planners and land use planners who may not be used to obtaining and using and interpreting biodiversity information. For example, a transportation planner may not be knowledgeable about what is the right data for wetlands or carbon sequestration. Additionally, they may not know how to interpret and apply it in their work, but they know that their project will impact endangered species, degrade water quality, or block a wildlife corridor. They can make decisions to change or modify the project to protect nature and its benefits. Okay. Therefore, the role of the Greenprint is to act as a bridge between the researchers who are creating the data and the planners who are making land use decisions every day. Our challenge in creating the Greenprint was to curate, synthesize, and communicate research in a way that is accessible and influential to practitioners regardless of expertise. For example, the Greenprint, a user does not have to know the difference between climate model projections or be able to run complex hydrologic models to understand how climate change may impact food production in an area. Instead, in designing the Greenprint, we synthesize the output of these models and research. So the tool reports a simple and influential metric, the additional irrigation needed to maintain the same crop at the same location. Okay. This is one example of how the Greenprint provides a tangible way to plan for climate-driven impacts and resilience. Instead of reporting the range in Celsius increase in temperature or the range in millimeters of precipitation expected for a region in change due to climate change, we report how these changes may put biodiversity or communities or other resources at risk. We also report actionable information on how nature-based solutions can make communities, the benefits nature provides, and biodiversity more resilient to these threats. So by making the science on biodiversity and natural resources easy to access and interpret, we can ensure that nature is a part of the planning process from the beginning, ensuring that the benefits communities receive from nature along with biodiversity are protected and resilient, even within a growing and urbanizing region. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Natalie.
Thank you, Fabrice. I'm going to talk about global and regional climate contexts with information based on the latest IPCC reports. So you know that climate has already warmed globally by almost 1 degree C since pre-industrial time, that is since about 1850. And we know that global warming is proportional to the cumulative CO2 emissions since pre-industrial times. That is what the figure on your left shows. So the more we put CO2 in the atmosphere, the warmer the planet gets. Since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we have reduced by about 9% globally the emissions of CO2, but we have still emitted CO2, and thus we have still increased its amount in the atmosphere. So we have not really slowed down the warming. It is also important to see and to note that the land is warming twice as fast as the globe. So we have already reached 1.5 degrees C over land, where we live and where we grow most of our food. When we will reach 1.5 degrees C of global warming, which will occur sometimes between 2030 and 2050, given the speed of today's warming, the land will be 3 degrees C warmer than in the 1850s, with many dramatic consequences on production and water resources. The last important point I show on the right-hand side of this slide is that extreme weather events increase faster than the mean values. The figure shows the evolution of heat waves in France with duration on the x-axis and temperature along the y-axis. The size of the bulbs measures the intensity of the heat wave. Red bulbs show what will happen after 2070 in the future, while yellow and orange bulbs are showing the past and the near future, that is before 2050. And you see many more red on this figure than yellow and orange, which means that we are expecting more and more heat waves in France with warming. And moreover, the red bulbs are expanding towards the upper right of the graphic and are very large, suggesting more intense heat waves to come. Okay? What we do to the land, what we plant, how we manage our crops, for example, with or without irrigation, have implications on both the quality of the air we breathe and on the hydrothermal comfort of the atmosphere where we live. This is because, as shown on the figure on your left, the land, the ecosystems, and the atmosphere continuously exchange gases, heat, water, energy, dust, and organic particles. Those exchanges affect the temperature, the humidity of the atmosphere, and its composition. They also affect cloudiness and rainfall. So the message here is that the climate where we live will result not only from the global climate change, but also from how we manage our territory. Okay? When we deal with impacts of climate change at our territorial level, and then it's what Carrie just talked about, and thus if we deal with adaptation, there is a need to translate the climate information provided by climatologists into useful indicators. Those indicators need to express the vulnerability to climate of the targeted resource. Let's take the example of the agricultural sector and of wheat-to-wheat production. That's what you see on your right-hand side. What is important for adaptation is to know what will be the climatic stress the plant will experience throughout its entire development, as too many stress imply low yields. The figure shows the various stages of development of wheat-to-wheat from sowing at the top, today in October, to harvesting on your left, today in July. The climatologists provide daily mean, maximum, and average values of temperature every day of each year until 2100. What is important for wheat? Well, seeds may die if temperature goes below -8 degrees C after sowing. Or if just before flowering in May, June, temperatures exceed 30 degrees C, then wheat will dislike that. So we need to go beyond the simple temperature value provided by the climatologists, and we need to develop some indicators, to co-develop indicators by making climatologists, agronomists, breeders, and farmers work together. So such a collaborative work can help choose the best species, the best variety, and the management necessary to adapt to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. I was pretty impressed by the heat bubbles, and it looks a bit scary. Louise, please.
Well, thank you to Natalie for setting the stage on greenhouse gas emissions and their effects. I'd like to present a regional case study for reducing greenhouse gas emissions on farmland. About 20 years ago, California established a program on climate change assessments to downscale global climate models for our region, and to also examine how vulnerabilities and impacts might differ for different sectors. A few years ago, they asked UC Davis to do an interdisciplinary study on how an agricultural jurisdiction could potentially reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also adapt to the changing climate. So we were a group of professors, grad students, and postdocs, and we chose our local county, Yolo County, for the study. We worked with county agencies, farm advisors and cooperative extension, groups such as the Farm Bureau and CalCan, which is an NGO for climate change in agriculture. And there were several topics: agroecology, hydrology, farmer attitudes, and others. But what I'm going to talk about is the project on greenhouse gas emissions. And then I'll end by explaining how the study influenced policy to conserve farmland. Okay. So very simple tier 1 methods were used to estimate greenhouse gas emissions based on conventional farm management. This included many crops, but no adjustment for soil type, and soil carbon was not included. In terms of the importance of different types of emissions, direct nitrous oxide from nitrogen fertilizers in soil was the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions, and next was mobile farm equipment such as tractors. So at the same time we were doing this, the county had consultants to look at municipal and industrial emissions. And they found that urban emissions were much higher than our numbers for cropland. And I just noticed a typo, it's per acre per year. So what the message is that cropland and rangeland have much lower greenhouse gas emissions than urban lands. So that protecting agricultural land from urban development is essential if the county's to stabilize and reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And that's something required by the state of California. Next, please. Okay. So another aspect of this study was a land use change project. It was conducted by Professor Steve Wheeler, who used a model to project urban growth in 2050. There was a business as usual high greenhouse gas emissions scenario, which is shown here on the map, and a sustainability low greenhouse gas emissions scenario that's not shown. And the storylines came from interviews with different stakeholders, both in the county and statewide. The gray areas are areas that were cities in 2008. The red areas are the new urban growth in 2050 under the business as usual scenario. So there's just 4 small cities in Yolo County, but even so, 10,000 acres of agricultural land would be lost. Urban greenhouse gas emissions would increase by 40% under this scenario, this business as usual scenario. Loss of top quality soils would be 15 times higher, and loss of wetlands and natural diversity areas would be 9 times higher. Finally, there's some policy outcomes from the study. With the results so favorable for agriculture, farmers supported the Yolo County Climate Action Plan in 2011. And at that time, farmers were still quite skeptical that climate change was even occurring. California established the Sustainable Agricultural Lands SALC program in 2014, and it was based partly on the findings of the study. In fact, it was the first time in the United States that lower greenhouse gas emissions were used to justify agricultural land conservation. And funds from the California's cap and trade policy support this program. Since then, SALC has protected more than 100,000 acres in California. It's tied to an infill affordable housing program, so there are multiple benefits for urban landscapes, both social and environmental benefits. The research outcome is that landscape research in one place provides a basis for policy to protect farmland elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. And finally, Romain, who I think is going to speak in French, but you have a translation is provided. Thank you.
Merci, merci Fabrice. Donc, dans le cadre de ce webinaire, nous parlons aujourd'hui d'espaces agricoles et naturels qui sont sous l'influence de grandes métropoles, à la fois en France et en Californie. C'est vrai que la contribution de ces espaces à la biodiversité, c'est un enjeu écologique majeur, mais c'est aussi un enjeu qui a une dimension sociale, et c'est ce que je voudrais rappeler très brièvement en tant que sociologue. Alors, nous sommes plusieurs chercheurs de l'Université Paris-Saclay, à la fois en sciences sociales, mais aussi en écologie, à participer à un projet qui s'appelle Terre Bio, dans lequel nous croisons nos approches pour mieux comprendre ce qui se joue dans les espaces cultivés sur les franges urbaines. Ces espaces, ce sont à la fois, bien sûr, des terres cultivées par des agriculteurs professionnels, mais aussi tous les terrains qui sont mis en culture par des habitants. Par exemple, des jardins associatifs ou encore des potagers privés. OK. Alors, Paul Ledley a rappelé tout à l'heure l'importance des services écosystémiques fournis par les espaces agricoles et naturels dans les régions urbaines. Alors, précisément, nous avons fait des enquêtes auprès de panels d'acteurs locaux, en interrogeant bien sûr des agriculteurs, des habitants des communes périurbaines, mais aussi ceux qui, tous les jours, viennent travailler ou qui viennent étudier sur le plateau de Saclay. Et nos questionnaires ont montré que ces différents acteurs du territoire identifient très bien un certain nombre de services produits par ces espaces. Je n'en citerai que quelques-uns. Une meilleure connexion à la nature, bien sûr, mais aussi la préservation d'un patrimoine paysager, le stockage du carbone ou encore la protection des sols. OK. Alors, concernant les espaces cultivés par les habitants que je mentionnais tout à l'heure, c'est-à-dire les potagers, on peut souligner trois choses à retenir. Première chose, le fait que ces espaces cultivés, même s'ils sont peu étendus, ils jouent clairement un rôle pour la biodiversité. Ce sont des refuges pour les insectes pollinisateurs, dont on a parlé tout à l'heure, mais aussi ce sont des espaces où la biodiversité cultivée est importante. Les jardiniers cultivent une grande variété de plantes aromatiques, de fruits et de légumes. Deuxièmement, ces productions, dans un cadre domestique, eh bien, c'est une contribution non négligeable à l'alimentation des ménages, et donc au système alimentaire local. Et troisième chose, enfin, les espaces cultivés, en plus d'être bénéfiques pour la biodiversité, ont pour effet de créer du lien social. Parce que les jardiniers ne se contentent pas d'être repliés sur eux-mêmes, ils échangent de manière informelle avec leurs voisins, qui sont parfois des agriculteurs. Ils échangent leur production de légumes, ils échangent des graines, ils échangent du compost, mais ils échangent aussi des savoirs et des connaissances. On peut donc considérer que ces espaces cultivés des franges urbaines sont des lieux où se recrée le lien entre la ville et la campagne, le lien entre deux mondes qui se sont longtemps ignorés, mais qui sont aujourd'hui de plus en plus interconnectés, notamment dans le contexte d'une demande accrue, une demande de nature, mais une demande aussi d'alimentation locale. Merci.
Thank you, Romain, and thank you to all of you. I think through those 5, different presentations, we've seen, the complexity of the issue, but also some of the solutions we can work on, on a global level, on a local level, the different, mix of different stakeholders in terms of differences between agricultural zones and urban zones. I think I'm going to take this opportunity also to ask the first question from the public. We have a little time. I'm going to read it on my phone. It comes through my phone, so I apologize. Can you say some words about nitrogen fixation and increasing the porousness of the soil so that the wetland ecosystem may prevail? And the second part of the question that I find interesting is, as a young PhD student in theoretical physics, is there a way to reorientate my career to tackle climate change with the use of my background in physics? Which I think is a very practical question. Who wants to answer that? Come on, I can't answer it myself. So
go for it, Natalie. But
okay.
Theoretical physics. There's a lot of physicists who work on climate. There's an extremely strong physical and chemical basis to that, and a lot of it's based on mathematical modeling. And most physicists come with an extremely strong mathematical background. So definitely, and it's really interesting, as Natalie said, to look at this. This connection between the way that land is used and local climate. I just make a pitch for ecology. Actually, I started in physics, and a number of people in our laboratory are ecologists started in physics. It's never too late to become an ecologist.
I also wanted to say that this person sounds interested in soils, and there's a tremendous need for soil physicists to work on hydrology and transport of water, both in the atmosphere and in the soil. So it's another idea.
We have more questions about research, which I'm going to keep for the second part of the discussion. But there is one here about legislation, so I'm going to ask this one before we move on. But why do not delegate so as to have a legislation like in Bhutan, which by the law states that 70% of the law in the country has to be forest? So that's a point we didn't make, but that's a very important, interesting point. What about legislation? What's the part of legislation in all the actions you were thinking of? Who wants to answer that?
Well, the example I talked about was an example that in which legislation has provided a source of funding for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Our cap and trade policy in California is what supports the Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program.
Louise, in a country like the US, is it possible even to talk, think about federal legislation, or it would have to be state or even local, authorities legislation?
Well, we can only hope that there will be federal legislation. There's new talk of that in recent months, days, but I think states are on their own right now, or have been recently.
Well, let's keep the hope up then. We have 4 more questions coming. I'm going to keep some from, as I said, for later. As a transition to the second part, and the second part of this discussion is going to be about trying, to study, have the case studies of the Santa Clara Valley and the Paris-Saclay, plateau. We're going to show some videos first, 2 short videos to give you some background on those 2 case studies, and then we're going to try to have a discussion about how do we go towards that resilience we're looking for, and we're going to introduce the part of research. So let's show the videos. I think the first one is about the Santa Clara Valley, and the second one is about Paris-Saclay Plateau.
Hello, I'm Andrea McKenzie, General Manager of the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. For over 40 years, Coyote Valley, one of the Bay Area's last remaining undeveloped valley floors, has been threatened with development. Now, the Open Space Authority, the Peninsula Open Space Trust, and the City of San Jose are together writing a new and different chapter for this last chance landscape by preserving 937 acres of open space in northern Coyote Valley to benefit nature and people. This is truly a watershed moment for permanently protecting wildlife habitat, natural floodplains, water resources, and investing in a climate-resilient future for the people of San Jose and the surrounding South Bay region. With the purchase of these key North Coyote Valley lands, we are growing the regional network of protected open space, wetlands, floodplains, and working lands, and creating a multi-benefit landscape of regional, state, and even national significance for nature and nature's contributions to people. Preserving open space and removing the threat of intensive development is the first step to implementing an ambitious and transformative vision for Coyote Valley. But we can't achieve this ambitious restoration and recreational vision alone. We invite you to join us in creating an exciting new chapter for San Jose's last great open space. Come discover Coyote Valley through exciting nature events. Roll up your sleeves and volunteer to help restore this unique natural landscape. Let your voice be heard as we reimagine and implement a plan for a greener future for one of the Bay Area's most significant natural areas. Protecting North Coyote Valley is truly a gift to future generations. Together, with your support, we will make Coyote Valley a landscape for all, forever.
Sur le plateau de Saclay, les sols sont très fertiles. La recherche et l'innovation aussi. Près d'un quart de la recherche publique française dans les domaines de l'agronomie ou du climat sera bientôt logée ici, avec des expertises très fortes sur les sujets de la biodiversité ou des sciences de l'environnement. La loi du Grand Paris de juin 2010 conduit l'agriculture et la recherche à se développer et à grandir ensemble. Le changement climatique et l'effondrement de la biodiversité sont aujourd'hui des réalités brutales qui impactent nos modes de vie. Les agriculteurs, par exemple, ont été confrontés très tôt à ces changements et cherchent à s'y adapter. L'expertise disponible ici est extrêmement précieuse pour créer de nouvelles manières d'organiser notre société.
Je m'appelle Paul Ledley, je suis professeur à Paris-Saclay. Je coordonne un laboratoire d'excellence qui s'appelle Biodiversité, agroécosystèmes, société et climat. Et l'ensemble des chercheurs travaillent en collaboration avec des agriculteurs sur le plateau de Saclay, surtout sur la question de la transition agroécologique. Donc, la transition agroécologique, c'est d'appliquer l'écologie à l'agriculture, c'est-à-dire de l'utiliser la biodiversité pour améliorer la qualité de pratiques agricoles. Donc, ce qui est intéressant avec le plateau de Saclay, c'est qu'on a un milieu agricole qui est complètement entouré par la ville, qui rend l'agriculture difficile sur le plateau de Saclay.
Dans le cadre du leader qui est en place sur le plateau de Saclay, il y a eu des travaux de recherche qui ont été effectués sur la matière organique et je me suis porté candidat pour ces études qui ont duré, ça a duré 4 ans où on avait différentes matières organiques, du compost, du fumier d'élevage, des lisiers, des digestats de méthanisation. Et puis l'année dernière, on a eu un autre essai avec des urines humaines. Il y a beaucoup de recherches pour récupérer toutes ces urines et puis les utiliser en agriculture.
Thank you so much for those 2 videos, which honestly I found very interesting. I have to say, Andrea, we all want to go visit the Coyote Valley. Let me introduce my 2 speakers and my 2 guests. Andrea McKenzie, that we saw on the video, who is the general manager of the Center Clara Valley Open Space Authority, and Caroline Doussin, or Karine Doucin in English, the president of Terre and Cité. And I'm going to ask them, basically to reflect on what we've seen and also maybe get into more details into the issue they are facing in their own territories. And then we can bring a discussion I have a lot of questions, so I'm very happy. My phone is ringing all the time, which is a good thing. And then after that, we'd introduce the scholars and researchers as well. So please, Andrea, maybe if you could just reflect on some of the issues you brushed in the video.
Thank you. Well, if I could show my slides, please. Thank you. Thank you very much, Fabrice. I would like to start by saying that at the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco in 2018, we learned that nature and nature-based approaches are 30% of the climate solution. Here in California, the governor just last year issued an executive order that 30% of the state's land and waters should be preserved by 2030. President Biden just yesterday signed a similar executive order at the national level. As a local government agency charged with protecting and stewarding the natural and working lands of the Santa Clara Valley, the OSA, as we're called, uses science-based research, partnerships, policy, education, and land acquisition to achieve our mission. We operate, as you see here, in a 1,000 square mile area of the San Francisco Bay Area, economically known as the Silicon Valley and biogeographically known as the Santa Clara Valley. The region we live in, as you heard, is a global biodiversity hotspot, has a population of over 2 million people, is one of the most diverse urban areas in the United States, and is a significant part of California's economy, which is ranked 5th largest in the world. Increasingly, our conservation work is focused on nature-based solutions to climate change and supporting the multiple benefits of natural and working lands adjacent to urban areas. We are an example of thinking globally and acting locally, helping link state, regional, and local policies with on-the-ground conservation action. Okay. Our highest conservation priority, as you just saw in the video, is the protection and restoration of the Coyote Valley, a rare valley floor landscape bordering the city of San Jose, the 10th largest US city, and the largest city in the Silicon Valley. This approximately 7,500 acre landscape has irreplaceable natural values, biodiversity, wildlife corridors, natural floodplains, groundwater basins, and high quality agricultural soils. Our conservation work in Coyote Valley is a case study for modeling how protection and restoration of natural and working landscapes on the urban edge can advance mitigation, adaptation, and resilience for people and nature. The OSA and its public and private partners have advanced a bold conservation vision for Coyote Valley through research and partnerships. By partnering with researchers at the University of California, including Dr. Louise JACKSON, we've built credibility for our thesis that natural and working landscapes like the Coyote Valley in peri-urban areas are critical to sustainability and resiliency. Nature, agriculture, and innovative local governments are increasingly finding common ground around nature-based solutions for sustainability and resiliency. With research as a foundation, the OSA has assembled strategic partnerships with government agencies and NGOs that is leading to better policy coordination and outcomes, support by elected officials, and increased funding for land protection. A few examples of these. In 2019, the California legislature passed a bill to designate Coyote Valley as a landscape of statewide significance, and this is shown in the slide outlined in the black line. The city of San Jose is now considering shifting 35,000 planned jobs from the North Coyote Valley area to infill locations and updating its land use designation from Coyote Valley from commercial industrial to agriculture and open space, which reflects a greater emphasis on nature-based climate solutions. And in November 2018, a $650 million infrastructure bond measure passed in the city of San Jose, which included $50 million for protecting the North Coyote Valley lands as green infrastructure you just saw on the video. We've also successfully partnered with local grassroots advocacy organizations to educate the public and local decision makers, as well as community and business leaders about the protection of natural and working lands adjoining our urban areas. Okay. In closing, when we link research, planning, policy, and advocacy along with land protection, we build the needed public support and case for on-the-ground conservation in landscapes like the Coyote Valley. The result, the protection of close to 1,000 acres of natural and working lands in the Coyote Valley in 2019 for water, wildlife, and working lands, and thousands of additional acres to be conserved in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And now, Caroline Doucerin, la president of Terre, Cité.
Bonsoir à tous. Terre Cité est une association créée par des agriculteurs. Elle est implantée depuis 20 ans sur le plateau de Saclay, au sud-ouest de Paris. Son périmètre est celui d'une petite région agricole qui est soumise à d'importantes pressions urbaines qui sont liées au développement de la métropole de la capitale, mais aussi à l'aménagement porté par l'État d'un cluster scientifique. Ainsi, cette zone périurbaine accueille à la fois des terres agricoles historiques et particulièrement fertiles et de nouveaux pôles urbains, scientifiques et technologiques. Dans le souci de préserver certains espaces de l'aménagement urbain de ce territoire, un outil important de protection et de valorisation des espaces naturels et agricoles a été mis en place. C'est la zone de protection naturelle, agricole et forestière du plateau de Saclay, on l'appelle la ZPNAF. Alors, la ZPNAF, c'est un outil administratif, une servitude d'utilité publique qui délimite sur le plateau un périmètre réglementaire d'environ 4115 hectares, dont 2469 hectares précisément de terres agricoles. Ce périmètre permet de préserver des terres agricoles, naturelles et forestières de toute forme d'urbanisation. Prévu par la loi du Grand Paris de 2010, son périmètre a été instauré par décret fin 2013 et un programme d'action a été lancé en 2017 suite à une première campagne de concertation. Au-delà de la préservation foncière, l'enjeu principal pour la ZPNAF, c'est d'assurer une dynamique partenariale entre les différents acteurs, entre le secteur public, privé, les associations et les échelons territoriaux. Actuellement, la ZPNAF semble en effet bien identifiée comme un outil de gestion foncière, mais pas encore comme un outil d'animation ou de coordination territoriale qui soit capable de faire émerger les actions individuelles au service d'une vision collective de l'avenir du territoire. Une évaluation du programme d'action est actuellement en cours pour qualifier l'impact des actions prévues et voir comment améliorer ce fonctionnement. C'est la multiplicité des enjeux et des acteurs qui fait la complexité, mais aussi la richesse de ce territoire qui doit, à présent, réinventer ses équilibres et, pourquoi pas, construire un modèle de société plus durable. Terre Cité a contribué à apporter des réponses et une dynamique intéressante à cette recherche. L'association a en effet été créée par les agriculteurs, puis a très rapidement intégré les différents acteurs en se structurant en 4 collèges représentatifs des parties prenantes du territoire. Les agriculteurs, bien sûr, les associations, la société civile et les collectivités locales. Les membres de ces collèges siègent à part égale au bureau et au conseil d'administration qui actent toutes les orientations stratégiques de l'association et assurent le fonctionnement co-constructif et participatif de Terre Cité. Cette association permet de pérenniser l'agriculture du territoire en accompagnant de nombreux projets de diversification agricole, de transition agroécologique et de développement de filières de proximité. Par exemple, nous avons travaillé à l'introduction des produits locaux comme le poulet, le pain, les laitages et les légumes du territoire dans le restaurant du personnel de l'Université Paris-Saclay. Nous animons également un programme LEADER. C'est un dispositif de financement qui s'appuie sur les fonds européens qui sont dédiés au développement rural dans la politique agricole commune de l'Union européenne. Suite à notre candidature en 2015, les acteurs du plateau de Saclay disposent de 1 239 000 € de cofinancement européen qui sont attribués au soutien des porteurs de projets et à la mise en œuvre d'une stratégie construite avec l'ensemble des acteurs locaux. C'est un outil de financement qui est essentiel pour notre territoire, mais aussi une méthode de développement local basée sur plusieurs principes fondamentaux. Une stratégie locale portée par une animation territoriale et une approche ascendante qui favorise les logiques de co-construction locale et la coopération entre les acteurs locaux par la création de partenariats. Ce programme nous permet de décloisonner les approches de développement et de favoriser l'innovation. Grâce au programme LEADER, nous avons notamment pu accompagner la diversification des fermes et le développement des filières locales de proximité, avec de nouvelles productions et de nouveaux points de vente pour le plus grand bonheur des habitants, salariés et étudiants du plateau de Saclay. Nous avons aussi, par exemple, pu accompagner l'achat de matériel agricole qui permet de faciliter le recyclage local de la matière organique ou encore permettre l'installation d'un berger qui pratique l'éco-pâturage. En partenariat avec le laboratoire d'excellence basque, nous avons commencé à organiser des rencontres entre chercheurs et acteurs locaux à partir de 2013. C'est ce qu'a évoqué Paul Ledley tout à l'heure. Ces échanges ont rapidement abouti à la création et à l'accompagnement d'une quinzaine de projets de recherche-action. Nous avons accompagné des projets portant sur le recyclage local de la matière organique produite sur le territoire afin de l'utiliser en agriculture. Nous avons également travaillé sur l'impact concret du changement climatique sur la culture du blé, du maïs ou des arbres fruitiers, par exemple. Ça a permis une prise de conscience majeure qui amène aujourd'hui l'ensemble des exploitations agricoles à vouloir mieux comprendre et réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Pour renforcer et pérenniser cette dynamique d'échange, Terre et Cité a mis en place avec ses partenaires un Living Lab. Il a pour vocation de coordonner et pérenniser ces interactions entre chercheurs et acteurs du territoire et il a permis d'accompagner l'émergence d'une quinzaine de projets de recherche construits avec les agriculteurs locaux. Nous accompagnons également la mise en place d'une zone d'études expérimentale, notamment la zone de Corbeville, qui est située dans une des zones d'urbanisation du plateau de Saclay. À l'avenir, face aux enjeux du changement climatique et de la biodiversité, cette dynamique de recherche-action collaborative doit permettre de trouver des solutions concrètes qui renforcent la durabilité de notre territoire et la participation de tous est vraiment essentielle pour y parvenir. Merci.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Andrea. I think we're going to start a discussion about those issues, and the good thing is I have many questions on my phone, so the public is very interested, and maybe I'm going to start first because I have a very simple questions. I mean, we've seen through all the presentations and also the presentations earlier from from our 5 guests that there's a difference obviously between the urban areas, the agriculture areas, and they bring different issues, different challenges. How do you kind of find the right balance between development, which is part of any kind of areas, peri-urban areas, and also preservation of natural habitats and natural spaces? And maybe Andrea, first for you, you mentioned that there's a lot of cities there, but also a huge natural landscape. How do you try to find that balance right there, which I think on the ground might not be so easy to find?
Thank you, Fabrice. One of the things I find is that sometimes land use and land use policy lags behind the need and the changes that are happening on the landscape, and climate change is a perfect example. So in California, for instance, many of the land use decisions were made many years ago, and they are not the best decisions for the crises we face today. And so sometimes one of the first things you need to do with science as a basis is set out to change hearts and minds and work with local elected officials and decision makers about whether land use policy in the past still works for us today. And one of the reasons science and research are so important is they lay the groundwork, the foundation to change those minds about policy going forward. And these big landscapes we've just seen in Paris-Saclay as well as Coyote Valley, these are rare landscapes. They don't make these anymore. We've got to do the best we can with these and work with elected officials in urban areas to see the importance, the nature-based solutions that can happen on these landscapes.
Thank you, Andrea. Caroline, kind of the same questions. How did you find that balance between development, and you mentioned earlier, and we saw it in the video as well, that there's a lot of urban areas around Paris-Saclay. So how do you find not only the balance but also the right actors? How do you convince people to be part of that equation?
Je suis désolée, je vais enlever la traduction, mais du coup, je ne suis pas sûre d'avoir eu toute la question. J'ai trop de décalage. Votre question...
Si vous voulez, je la répète très rapidement en français. on a vu dans les différentes interventions le décalage et la différence entre les zones urbaines, les zones d'agriculture et comment justement on fait cohabiter ça. La question, c'est de façon générale, comment on trouve cet équilibre, quels sont les acteurs qui sont nécessaires à trouver cet équilibre et comment on met en balance le développement au niveau urbain et puis tout simplement la préservation des habitats naturels.
Alors, c'est un vrai défi qui nécessite de mettre effectivement autour de la table tous les acteurs concernés. On a beaucoup parlé du partenariat qu'on a favorisé entre la recherche et l'agriculture au sein de l'association. Ça nécessite aussi évidemment l'implication des élus et de l'État et en fait de toutes les parties prenantes pour que chacun se comprenne et comprenne ses problématiques et surtout travaille à la construction d'une orientation partagée parce qu'on expérimente régulièrement sur notre territoire le décalage parfois entre le grand projet d'OIN, c'est-à-dire de cluster scientifique qui est prévu sur notre territoire, et puis la préservation des terres et des activités agricoles. Et donc, chacun a ses objectifs avec beaucoup d'ambition et en définitive, il faut vraiment arriver à faire correspondre tout ça à une même direction qui soit à l'arrivée une construction durable pour notre territoire.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start, reading some of the questions, and one is very direct, and I think it concerns both of you, and with a little amendment to Caroline on the European side. But there's one question, very simple. One of the public here is asking: are the farmers ready to face those environmental challenges? Are they ready to discuss them? Are they ready to do something about it? And in your case, Caroline, more precisely, are they ready also to be part of the, in terms of Europe and European, thinking on preservation? Are they ready to agree to those European directives coming from Europe? So maybe Andrea first, in terms of when you talk to farmers, when you talk to people that are on that land, do you find resistance? Do you find them ready? Do you find I guess sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I don't know.
Alors, ce qu'on expérimente, c'est une très bonne question parce qu'effectivement, les agriculteurs témoignent toujours du fait qu'on leur a appris à cultiver selon certains modèles. Et par contre, ils voient bien qu'ils sont de toute façon confrontés au changement climatique et aux conséquences que ça a sur les modes d'agriculture qu'on leur a enseignés, sur la façon de faire qu'on leur a apprise. Et donc, quelque part, si ils ne sont pas convaincus, s'ils ne sont pas forcément conscients au départ des nécessités de faire évoluer leur modèle, ils sont très vite confrontés à la réalité et au besoin d'y entrer. Donc chacun avec sa personnalité et sa perception des enjeux du développement durable, finalement rentre progressivement dans le système. Et du coup, je dois dire que grâce notamment à l'apport de la recherche, puisque justement, on a évoqué tous les travaux qui ont été menés et Paul et Nathalie qui sont présents avec nous aujourd'hui ont beaucoup participé à ça, à la prise de conscience pour les agriculteurs des conséquences du changement climatique sur leur mode de culture et sur les réponses à travailler ensemble, la nécessité de travailler ensemble sur les réponses à y apporter. Donc, quelque part, ce mouvement, il se fait de façon assez forte et assez naturelle par le principe de réalité. Et je ne peux pas dire qu'il y ait une très forte résistance. La seule chose, c'est que les agriculteurs, ils demandent clairement à ce qu'on comprenne qu'ils ont besoin d'y aller progressivement parce que derrière, il y a quand même des modèles économiques dont il faut prendre conscience également.
Thank you, Caroline. What about you, Andrea, on the other side, in California, what's the situation in terms of farmers?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we need to understand is a place like Santa Clara Valley, up until the 1950s, 60s, it was one of the most active agricultural regions in the United States. When Silicon Valley started arriving, there was a transformation of the landscape from agricultural land to development. This signaled to farmers that their future was development. And so we started to see a change there of taking lands out of production or putting land into crops that could be quickly changed to development. Today, we see a spectrum of farmers. We see long-standing farmers who are hoping that they can develop. We see farmers, say in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who are willing to change. They will produce ecosystem services on their property if you incentivize them to do so. And then we have young beginning farmers wanting to come in, but they have to be able to afford the land. So this is where policy and legislation and incentives come in to change the paradigm of farming in a urban area, in a highly developing place where land is very expensive.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm going to try to be clever and use one of those questions to actually transition to the next phase, which is about research, because one question is exactly on that. And I'm going to read it here if I find it. Could the lose-lose situation with climate change affecting crop yield perhaps be used to try and convince agricultural actors, including lobbies, to work with scientists? And as I said, that's a perfect introduction to the second part of that discussion, on those two case studies. And I'm going to introduce, our distinguished guests, Paul and Louise, to be part of the discussion, because there is a discussion to have here between, local stakeholders, but also scientists and researchers. And maybe start with Louise. And in terms of the inputs, maybe you could give some examples of your own experience in terms of, first of all, what can you bring, but also how do you talk to local stakeholders to make them understand that there is something that research can bring to that debate?
10 years ago, I think that many farmers in California were very skeptical that climate change was really occurring. We have such variable climate to begin with. But with the changes in huge drought, changes in temperature, there's more and more interest. I think that the farmers who are in it for the long haul, as Andrea described, are people who truly have a sense of stewardship for the land, and they may be constrained by the economic and market situations they're in. In my own experience, a good way to kick this off is to work with the innovator farmers and just work on their land, get to know them, see what they're doing, document it in extreme detail with different kinds of metrics. And then once that farmer in that area is perceived both scientifically and economically to be successful, then other farmers in the area get interested in how they can adapt those things on their land. And another phase of research is to then track that development of their changes.
So basically use farmers as ambassadors, some of them, just showing the example.
Yes, and not ask too much out of them. Don't start with a big multifactorial experiment. Describe what they're doing.
Aren't we in a hurry in terms of the deadlines and what could come next? Or we have to be still progressive?
Good question. And I'm not a sociologist. Maybe Romain has some examples of how you get people to change. I'm an ecologist. I think that the change is, as Andrea also mentioned, that there's a lag. And unless we get people truly engaged, we won't be able to give our very insightful agricultural research a try.
Thank you. Paul, what about your own experience in terms of working with local stakeholders and on all different levels? And we do know that France has this habit of having a lot of different levels, administrative levels also on top of everything else. So how do you work with all of this?
So to get to the question about dealing with farmers in particular, I think that a lot of our experience has shown that if you really do enter into co-construction of projects together, a lot of the farmers are really open to thinking about research. You just have to find common ground. And like Louise said, and it does help to talk to some of the more progressive farmers, and then it leads to more interactions. And to answer the specific question that you asked earlier about the couldn't a lose situation lead to more cooperation, I think climate change, as Louise said, 10 years ago, many of the farmers in our area as well weren't really all that concerned about climate change. And then we've had a couple of years where it's really had strange climates and has caused some serious problems for farmers. And now I would say most of the farmers in the entire region are very concerned about climate change, and that has led to a strong interactions with us. At a multi-scale, the multi-scale question is yes, it is going to take multi-scalar changes. We can't just think that innovation is going to come from the bottom. And there's too often a tendency to oppose top-down versus bottom-up innovation. They really feed off of each other. And it's very clear that we need our research institutions. In France, it's INRA and AgroParisTech, which are sort of leaders in agricultural research. Their research programs really have to be turned more towards this innovation and co-construction of research. And at the same time, at the bottom level, we have to be looking, as Louise said, for ways that we can innovate, especially searching out the farmers that are really open to this innovation and then can spread that innovation to people around them. Organic agriculture is a really good example where 10 years ago, there was no organic agriculture where we are. Now 25% of the agriculture in Saclay. And that's in part because of a few innovative people who've shown that you can do it and make money and also be happy with the way that you're living.
We have a lot of questions asking about concrete examples of, applied research programs that are current and making a difference. And I would like to ask, the four of you on your different, the expertise. Could you give a concrete example of something that's actually working at the moment that you have been implementing and that has made a difference? Maybe Paul, and then we go back to Louise and Andrea and then Caroline.
Well, Carolyn has already mentioned, I think, one of the more successful programs, and that is in our peri-urban area, and it's true of many peri-urban areas, there's not enough organic material to put back into the soils, and that leads to an impoverishment of the soils. They're biologically very poor. They don't store much carbon. They have problems with their own nutrient cycling. And urban areas have lots of organic material, but not in forms that most farmers would use. And so we've had a program that's been put in place working with farmers, researchers, but also those people who are producing this organic material. And you saw one of the farmers in the video at Terre Cité talking about the work that he's been doing with researchers about using organic material coming mostly from urban sources and being able to get that into farms so that you can have healthy soils. And that's been a real success in changing the way that urban areas and agricultural areas interact.
Louise, thank you, Paul. Louise, can you think of something a bit concrete to give, to make people think about the way it could be organized? Oh, we need your mic.
Sorry. I think that a landscape approach is very effective. And I feel that in agriculture, we tend to be very practice oriented, we are problem oriented, and use our very rigorous statistical methods to design experiments that are very appropriately set up scientifically, but they don't consider the range of possibilities that might occur in a growing region, such as different soil types, different propensity for water availability. So a couple of studies that we did in Yolo County were involved with looking at hedgerows and waterways and looking at the possibility in different locations to grow plants that could store carbon and ameliorate water quality. So trying to embrace the diversity so people can identify themselves and their problems and do it in a much more comprehensive spatial analysis is useful.
Thank you, Louise. Andrea, I'm going to put maybe another question in there. We're talking about concrete examples. There's one question saying, okay, you're talking a lot about, agricultural lands and, and climate change. What about agricultural lands and pollution? And how do you address that? And is that something that you need to address specifically in some areas, depending on which kind of pollution? But, we asking you, basically people are asking you, can you address that issue as well?
Well, one of the ways I would address the question of pollution and air quality as they relate to natural and working lands on the urban edge is to better understand what are the contributors from the working lands And in what ways are the working lands helping to mitigate air pollution and air quality issues? So for instance, in California, we have air quality districts at the state level and the local level who are pushing for better policies on pollution and as they relate to climate change. But they far too often don't even look at open space and agricultural lands adjoining the cities. So one of the things we're looking at now is how can we mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled by shifting development and density from our natural and working lands adjoining the cities into the city themselves. And then developers can claim that difference to do more density in the city. And the money that they pay for that goes to conserving and buying more agricultural and open space land. It's in some ways creating a credits program. So that's one way we're kind of looking at this. And the other is to try and incentivize a suite of ecosystem services that farmers will be encouraged to do through incentive payments, and that will lead to better air quality.
Oh, I was about to ask a question that nobody asked so far about money and incentives, but so I guess that's part of also of the equation. You have to tell people, to show people that this is the right thing to do, but you also have to find the right ways to make them, evolve and change.
Right. So far, much of what we're talking about today is under-resourced in terms of the funds that government is willing to put toward farmers who are willing to do innovative practices. That has to change. We are a very small public agency, but we are putting our money into some of these practices. The county or the region is starting to compensate landowners for ecosystem services on agricultural lands, but it's still a very small amount of money. So when the national government and the state government says we want to support natural and working lands, 30% of the state, 30% of the country, protection of natural and working lands, we need to put money behind that to make sure we bring the farmers along with us. They have the knowledge, they have the land. Let's give them the tools to do this.
Thank you so much. Caroline, I'm coming back to you, still with concrete examples, but also there's a concrete concern here that I want to read. And it mentions many concerns are about the construction of the railway that could threaten the agricultural and natural lands of the Plateau de Saclay. Doubts on the efficiency of the current political tools. Are they sufficient to protect efficiently agricultural and natural peri-urban land? So we're coming directly to a concern that has to do with the plateau, the urban areas, the agricultural areas, and the railway that could be built there. How do you address all those concerns in practical terms, Caroline?
Alors, on a les outils qu'on a évoqués de préservation. Tout à l'heure, j'ai évoqué la fameuse ZPNAF qui tend à préserver les terres agricoles, mais ça ne suffit pas de préserver des terres. Il faut aussi que les agriculteurs puissent les exploiter. Et les sujets, notamment du métro que vous évoquez, sont au cœur des débats aujourd'hui parce qu'il faut qu'on travaille avec toutes les structures concernées, notamment l'État, dont je parlais tout à l'heure, qui construit ce fameux cluster, qui a prévu un métro pour le desservir. Ce métro traverse des terres agricoles et donc nous sommes amenés à sensibiliser tous ceux qui veulent construire ce transport aux conséquences que ça a sur les fonctionnalités agricoles. Quand vous faites traverser un champ par une structure lourde comme un métro, bien sûr, il y a des difficultés pour traverser, il y a des conséquences sur la capacité à cultiver le champ en question, des conséquences sur la biodiversité, la perte de la notion de trame noire, bien sûr, avec la lumière engendrée. Donc, beaucoup d'éléments qui, finalement, portent à nouveau atteinte aux espaces agricoles et naturels de façon induite, même si la ZPNAF est là au départ. Et donc, tout ça nécessite une forte implication de tous les acteurs pour essayer de trouver les meilleures solutions possibles. Et aujourd'hui encore, à vrai dire, la soutenabilité du métro pour les exploitations agricoles est en question sur le territoire. C'est un vaste débat qui implique tous les acteurs.
Thank you. Paul, I wanted to come back to you because we mentioned a little bit with Andrea the question of money, and but what about public policy in general? I mean, in terms of how, as a researcher, how are you able to kind of impact public policy in terms of, again, on those areas you're working on? How do you make people change so the policies are changing and though there's a real impact on what, on the ground?
Wow, that's a huge question. So my personal involvement in that is through assessment processes. And I think IPBES at the international level has played a really important role in raising the visibility of biodiversity as an issue at the international level, like the IPCC has done for climate change. And that's had a real impact on the discourse at the national level. So Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has begun to talk a lot about biodiversity, not only in France, but in international settings. And it's really important that you have this change in discourse at the international level. There was just last year, the first UN General Assembly focused on biodiversity as an issue. More than 60 leaders, government leaders signed a pledge for nature. That's incredibly important. But one has to remember that being active on that level only goes that far, and that has then to translate into concrete policy at national levels and particularly at local levels. And that's where the tricky part is, because it doesn't just naturally trickle down from the international level to the national level to the local level. And so you also have to be really active at the local level. And I think that's where many researchers have a lot of difficulty. They tend to focus on those that tend to focus on mobilizing a lot of actions at the local level tend to get penalized academically because they're very focused on very specific kinds of actions. And those that tend to work very broadly and generally don't necessarily have this impact that then filters down to the local level. And so it's very difficult to bring those things together.
Thank you, Paul. I wanted to bring Louise as well, because we have questions about different approaches. People are talking about, okay, are we talking about bottom-up innovations, or are we talking about top-down innovations? And I think it's interesting because I think there's differences maybe in the approach of Paris-Saclay and Santa Clara. So maybe Louise, you can just address that, and then maybe go back to Andrea and Caroline after that, because I think it's a very important question.
Well, what I'm noticing from these discussions is that California may have more of a top-down public engagement policy driven agenda for saving open space and agricultural lands. And sounds like your example in Paris-Saclay is more farmer engagement. But I think in any case, what we really need for change is boundary organizations that can link the research with what could potentially go on. For example, in the project I discussed, the professors were not comfortable with addressing the policy in the state capital. We would be very willing to give our data, but that idea that you are an activist professor is just not how we operate in academia. And so having an organization, the name is CalCAN in California, California Climate Action Network, be involved in our project, they're tuned in to both the state, national, global issues and are very experienced at how to put it together in a way that policymakers can understand. So it's that willingness to embrace more actors in the research and to let go as a researcher and avoid that sense of, oh no, we don't advocate for this or that. We are so narrow in our view. Yes, we do have to activate interest with people who can make those links.
Thank you, Louise. So, Andrea, what do you think about this? Those two approaches, bottom up, top down. I mean, we've seen some, some differences, and people have perceived that. What do you think?
Well, I think as we've heard today, we need both, and one of the reasons we need both is to be able to scale the successes to larger landscapes and to bring in the resources that we need to continue our work through funding. And so it's very, very hard work, as everyone on today's panel understands, but we have to be working at the local government level, NGOs, regions, state, and ultimately federal. And we can't be afraid to lead if the policy or the funding isn't there yet. We have to figure out how to do that. But when the policy does start to change at the federal and state level, to be right there to show that the work we're doing is a model for that state. And if it means letting the state and federal officials be the champions of the day, so be it. But we don't have the time to do things one at a time. We've got to scale up quickly. And so we're always looking for researchers who are interested in applied research. They may be respected professors by day and activist professors by night, but together I think we can get a lot done and earn the respect of decision makers who are hyper aware right now that they must respond to climate change. And so let's give them what they're asking for.
Thank you. Caroline, would you agree that we need some kind of a global and collective approach, and that's what, and we need to push, as Andrea said, whatever, the tools and everything else, but we need that collective approach to be able to move things.
Je pense que les deux approches sont effectivement, enfin cette approche collective est effectivement très intéressante et que il y a un équilibre à trouver entre le sens ascendant et descendant, mais je crois qu'il y a aussi une question culturelle et sociétale derrière tout ça et on voit bien qu'en France en ce moment, le top-down, ça marche moins bien. En tout cas, c'est moins bien entendu que le bottom-up ou moins attendu, on va dire. Donc, voilà, je pense que si on veut être efficace, il faut savoir allier les deux, mais surtout choisir aussi la voie qui convaincra le plus de nos concitoyens de s'y investir et de faire fonctionner les choses dans le bon sens.
Thank you. I'm going to use the last question. It was very kind of general, but I think it's could be a nice kind of not conclusion, but at least a nice element to add to the discussion. Somebody's asking, do we need to have some kind of a punitive approach where we punish people when they don't when they don't agree to something, or do we have to stay positive all the time? Which I think as I said, it's a general question, but I ask the four of you, maybe starting with Louise. Does punishment work as well, or not really?
Well, there's plenty of punishments in California if you consider people who don't comply with environmental regulations or don't join the watershed groups that they're required to be part of. So yes, I would say that there is an aspect of that is an incentive for some farmers, but I think the people who are going to be in it for the long haul are aware that we now have lots of data and lots of research projects compared to, say, 15 years ago that really show that soil health matters, that there are definitely ways to deal with pests that are not just hardcore pesticides. So what we're lucky in right now is that we can show information that works for more sustainable solutions.
Paul, what do you think about that? Just still trying to be positive, works better?
So I agree with Louise. I mean, for certain things, you need to have laws and they need to be enforced. But the first thing we have to do is stop encouraging financially bad behavior. So if you look at agricultural subsidies in everywhere, and in particular in France or in Europe, most of the money rewards agricultural practices that are not good for the environment. And we know that. And that's a huge fraction of the EU, the European Union budget. It's more about making sure that the money that gets invested is to reward people for good behavior and stop providing huge sums of money that rewards bad behavior. And I think that'd go a lot further than increasing the amount that people get punished for doing things. There's a huge, tremendous possibility for changing rewards for bad behavior to good behavior.
Thank you. Andrea and Caroline, I just want to ask you something very simple. What do you think what would be the three main things, three priorities for you in terms of those things we need to, to do them if we want to move, and if we want to go somewhere, if we want to move towards resilience? Andrea first, and Caroline.
We're seeing the potential of the transformative change we can make, but we have to scale it up. And so I think in the near term, when we hear bold proclamations at our state and federal level about preserving 30% of the land by 2030, we've got to get action at those government levels in moving forward to preserve those lands and finding the funding to do so. We have to translate climate science into on-the-ground action on our farmlands and our working lands. What does that mean to put those in place? I think we may need to move forward quickly with pilots that have been done and not have to do new pilots for every single piece of property. A great example is the work Louise JACKSON did in Yolo County. We took that work and said 70% of greenhouse gas emissions are higher in urban and suburban areas in agriculture. So we know that, let's go with that. And I think we have to do a lot of education still, both with elected officials and the public. There's still a perception out there to some degree that agriculture means agribusiness on a large scale, and that they are bad actors. And just back to the question you asked a minute ago, I think in California and the United States, we call them carrots and sticks. Mm-hmm. The carrots need to go to the farmers and the stewards to help bring them along. And the sticks need to be used for those that would take advantage of the loopholes or old land use policy to do business as usual. So we have to be working at it from both ends. And that's where I think research and education at the university level comes in. People like Louise JACKSON, who is a University of California Cooperative Extension, they are uniquely suited to help landowners, farmers understand how to move to this next place.
Thank you. And we call them the same thing in French, by the way, la carotte et le bâton. Caroline, your priorities for you. What are the main priorities so we can move forward?
Je ne serai pas très originale par rapport à tout ce qu'a pu dire Andrea, parce que je pense effectivement que la conviction et l'éducation sont effectivement la clé pour essayer d'embarquer le plus vite possible un maximum de citoyens dans ces actions, d'accompagner la diversification des productions alimentaires aussi, afin de ne pas quelque part mettre tous nos œufs dans le même panier, et puis d'agir dès maintenant avec tous les acteurs pour que ce soit la recherche, les acteurs publics, les agriculteurs, pour pouvoir obtenir des résultats concrets, démontrer qu'on peut effectivement à tous les échelons avoir une action efficace, et que voilà, tous ces chiffres très effrayants qu'on fait circuler sur le climat, alors plus ou moins compréhensibles et plus ou moins effrayants d'ailleurs, effectivement, peuvent être modifiés, influencés par un comportement collectif et ainsi nous permettre d'aller vers une vraie résilience.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. I've learned a lot. I hope people did as well. This is not the end. I want to say, because as we said, this is an introductory webinar, and it's supposed to lead to 3 other webinars in the next few weeks and months. And also, we're going to have an open discussion after that to invite you to discuss those webinars, those themes, and the way maybe your input as well. I'm going to give you the themes of those webinars. I'm going to read them. I'm sorry, but it's right there. The first is about land planning. The second one is about strategies to adapt to climate change and reduce carbon emissions. And the third one is about the feedback to design for further conferences. So what we're doing right now is we're going to, first of all, thank everybody and all the guests on this panel, because I do think it was a very interesting discussion. And also, I do think we opened the way for solutions, and maybe those two case studies made it kind of pragmatic and realistic, which I think is great. We're going to have a 5 minutes break. I'm going to disappear. I'm going to give my baton to Dorian Spack from Terre and Cité, which is going to moderate an open discussion. So please, all of you who want to stay to discuss, the issues, or also the next webinar, stay. We have 5 minutes break, and all the platforms are going to stay open on YouTube and also on this platform as well. Thank you again. Thank you to all our guests, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bonjour et merci du coup de rester pour la suite de la discussion. Quand nous avons commencé à travailler avec les chercheurs en 2013, Paris-Saclay était déjà souvent appelée la Silicon Valley française. Une géographe avec laquelle nous travaillions alors, Cécile Faliès, a fait valoir que la vraie Silicon Valley, en Californie, n'avait pas pour seule caractéristique de concentrer tous les géants de l'économie du numérique. La Californie a en effet été le premier État dans le monde à mettre en place des politiques publiques de préservation des espaces naturels. Et la baie de San Francisco est réputée pour sa qualité de vie et la qualité de ses espaces agricoles et naturels. Cécile est alors allée plus loin et a identifié l'Open Space Authority de Santa Clara comme un territoire qui menait des actions assez similaires à celles de Terre et Cité. Et on s'est rencontrés du coup en 2016. On a très vite compris avec Andrea et Marc que nous faisions face aux mêmes enjeux. Le 11 septembre 2018, l'Open Space Authority de Santa Clara a invité Terre et Cité pour organiser un événement conjoint au Global Climate Action Summit de San Francisco pour mettre en évidence les solutions au niveau local qui peuvent contribuer à résoudre certains grands problèmes environnementaux. Cet événement a suscité un vif intérêt, tant parmi nos partenaires qu'à l'étranger. Et la richesse et la qualité des échanges entre Caroline, Andrea et Sam Liccardo, le maire de San José, a amené la délégation de la Commission européenne aux États-Unis à soutenir en novembre 2019 l'organisation d'une visite-retour d'une délégation de Californie en France qui devait avoir lieu en septembre 2020. Cette délégation comprend des représentants politiques et académiques de haut niveau, ainsi que des représentants de la société civile. Bien sûr, en raison de la pandémie, cet événement est pour l'instant reporté en 2021. Et au moment du report, l'Université Paris-Saclay a proposé de démarrer des webinaires qui nous permettraient de partager nos expériences, de faire avancer la recherche et de contribuer concrètement à la construction de politiques publiques plus ambitieuses pour la préservation et l'évolution des espaces agricoles et naturels de nos territoires. Ce projet est soutenu par l'IIT Climate-KIC, soutenu par la Commission européenne, l'IIT Climate-KIC et avec ses partenaires dans 40 pays, plus de 1600 startups et 2000 diplômés, la principale communauté publique et privée d'innovation systémique en Europe pour atténuer le changement climatique et s'y adapter. Maintenant, on aimerait vraiment avoir votre retour sur la suite du coup de ce travail. Comme je l'ai dit, l'idée, c'est pas de s'arrêter à ce webinaire introductif, c'est d'avancer vers des conférences qui rentrent plus dans les sujets qu'on a pu évoquer. Et donc, voilà, on serait content, dans un premier temps, déjà d'avoir votre retour dans le chat si vous ou votre organisation pourriez être intéressé pour contribuer à cette dynamique. Et si vous avez envie de mentionner certaines choses à cet effet, n'hésitez pas à le faire. Voilà, pendant que je continue la présentation, n'hésitez pas à mentionner dans le chat si vous souhaiteriez d'une manière ou d'une autre vous impliquer ou participer à la dynamique qui est en cours pour qu'on puisse intégrer ces éléments dans la mesure du possible dans l'organisation des prochaines conférences. Maintenant, du coup, je vais venir à la deuxième partie de la discussion d'aujourd'hui, qui consiste à dire que pour donner suite au webinaire, on a prévu des conférences plus approfondies pour contribuer plus concrètement à la prise en compte du changement climatique et de la biodiversité à l'échelle locale. On a d'ores et déjà, ensemble, lors des sessions préparatoires à l'échange d'aujourd'hui, imaginé une approche intégrative pour aborder ces sujets en montrant concrètement la coopération essentielle qui doit se mettre en place aujourd'hui entre les acteurs de la recherche, les acteurs des politiques publiques et les acteurs de terrain. Nous ferons intervenir sur chaque territoire, en Californie et en France, une série d'intervenants qui expliqueront comment ils ont procédé, les difficultés auxquelles ils se sont retrouvés confrontés et leurs idées et recommandations pour l'avenir. Nous partirons à la fois d'un problème de société qui pousse à co-construire une question de recherche avec les acteurs concernés. Et puis nous montrerons comment cette connaissance scientifique peut aider à concevoir des dispositifs de politique publique innovants et nous ferons témoigner les acteurs de terrain qui ont accompagné concrètement la mise en œuvre de ces politiques et qui pourront dire les difficultés qu'ils ont rencontrées, les manques éventuellement, mais aussi les réussites et ce qui a marché, etc. L'idée, c'est bien sûr d'engager plus largement un dialogue entre les acteurs qui sont concernés en Californie et en France pour faciliter l'appropriation des démarches qui ont marché, mais aussi identifier les pistes de progrès et d'amélioration par la suite. Donc, voilà, maintenant qu'on a exposé un petit peu l'approche qu'on avait envisagée, on serait content, si vous le souhaitez, d'avoir votre retour sur cette approche et de pouvoir nous dire si voilà, ça vous semble une manière intéressante d'aborder les choses, ou si vous verriez éventuellement d'autres manières d'aborder ces choses-là et d'autres contributions qui pourraient être apportées à la discussion. Là, je vais vous laisser un petit moment pour poster vos questions ou vos contributions sur le chat si vous le souhaitez. Et puis ensuite, on va essayer de synthétiser les principales questions qui ressortent et poser du coup ouvertement la question aux autres contributeurs de la discussion pour voir comment est-ce qu'on peut au mieux intégrer vos retours pour la suite. Donc, on vous laisse quelques minutes pour échanger sur le chat. Merci beaucoup.
Non.
Tu peux couper. Merci beaucoup. Donc, il y a eu un principal retour. Maybe I will speak in English for the speakers. It's going to be easier for the discussion. There's been one main feedback that it would be interesting not only to display the research actors, but also the local stakeholders that are involved in the implementation of all that. And well, I will everybody comment. I will let everybody comment on that, but that was actually pretty much the orientation that we had chosen for now. Maybe if anyone that was part of the discussion, maybe Louise, if you want to bring in something in this regard.
Yes, I think it's always interesting to see the people who are involved and hear from them. And you mentioned research actors, they're easier to define, and local stakeholders. And something we haven't heard a lot about is what Carrie talked about, and the fact that the green print that she discussed was not so much intended for the farmers right on the ground, but for the people who are involved in some of the planning. And I'm just wondering if there's a counterpart to the green print in this Paris-Saclay area, or if maybe Carrie could talk a little bit about the type of actors who were engaged in creating the green print.
Yeah, I guess some of the actors, we did have a pretty robust set of advisors, strategic advisors and science advisors. The science advisors made sure that we had the right information in there and we were interpreting it in the right way. And then the strategic advisors advised us on how we could influence and leverage policy and how we could reach our key users. And one of the developers was also American Farmland Trust. So we did try to represent the agricultural community. They were part of our core team, but we also made sure to do outreach to the agricultural community. But the green print is free and accessible. So while we did design it with planners in mind, it is also used by people for their own properties or advocates. So people are using it even if it wasn't necessarily designed as our targeted key user, but it's accessible to landowners as well.
Thank you so much. Maybe, Andrea, I think you've tried in the Open Space Authority a number of things, and I think the OSA or its ground partners who probably have a lot to contribute in the discussion of what can be tried out and what works and what doesn't maybe completely work now but can be improved for the future and everything. So there's probably a lot of contributions from grounds stakeholders that have been trying to make things go in the right direction these last years.
Yeah, I would like to think it's a little more sophisticated than throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, but we are trying many interventions in land use policy, local land use policy, state policy, working with local cities and counties on their climate action plans, working with collaborative state programs like Louise mentioned, the Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program, to help the state see some of the very exciting work happening at the local level. And increasingly through our land protection, land conservation, of showcasing that through a nature-based solutions climate lens. So the idea is every time we make progress, whether it's through policy or on the ground action, we bring it back to the actors through kind of an integrated lens. So we keep trying to build the momentum, build a steady drumbeat of the successes that we can show happening, so we get more people excited about this kind of work.
Thank you so much. The idea is not to deliver now the full conferences, so we will not move on further so much into the topics, but the idea was really to let you see a little bit of the diversity of the things that can be integrated in the experience, and the OSA has done a great amount of work in this regard. I don't know if there's one of the speakers or the researchers that were involved before that want to add on something on these questions before we move on to the last part and the last question we had for the participants today. Feel free to do so. And otherwise, we want to move to the last point, and actually to come back to the teams that we had already identified for the further conferences. So there's one team that would deal about the public policy tools in terms to have land planning as a tool to preserve biodiversity and adapt to the changing climate and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in peri-urban areas. And the second team that we had chosen until now is about strategies to adapt to climate change and reduce carbon emissions at the farm level. And well, we know we'd like to do a little more than 2 additional conferences, so we are very open and happy to welcome your proposals or other ideas about the coming themes for the conferences for the future. So don't hesitate to comment in chat and add on a little matter for thoughts so that we can decide on the themes later on.
Well, I just noticed in one of the questions, somebody's asking about the empty spaces in urban areas and how they could tie into this. And I just wanted to mention a memory of growing up in Santa Clara Valley when I was a child in the 50s and 60s. And it was a patchwork of open spaces of small farm stands, small farms, bigger orchards, You could buy a lot of your fresh fruit and vegetables just within walking or biking distance from your home. So there is a legacy of an integrated peri-urban land uses. And I'm wondering if we might need to move a little further into the city limits to think about how we can think of different kinds of scales of open and agricultural land use as a mosaic and who those might serve.
So Romain, I don't know if you'd want to jump in there. I mean, that's one of the things that you've been looking at is the role of some of these smaller interstitial spaces in cities. And it's not so straightforward. I mean, there is a lot of thinking in France. So the newest legislation really does push towards infill. So making sure that you fill in all the empty spaces in places that are already urbanized. And if I'm not mistaken, Romain, some of your work calls into question that as a strategy.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, I think yes, this is a big issue because we have planning policies in France, but also in other countries that are fostering densification trends. And the problem is that too much densification could endanger the preservation of important plots for biodiversity as private gardens, as I mentioned before. And so perhaps the difficult issue is to try to combine ambitious initiatives to produce and to address the housing needs in big conurbations like the Paris region, and in the other side to preserve these open areas that remained in the suburbs, like collective gardens and private gardens. So I think the difficulty for planners and for elected officials is to combine these two issues.
And that really shows in the questions that we have currently in chat and in the contributions. One of them being, should the empty spaces in urban areas be urbanized or left green for other uses? And then another question also about what we do with the little spaces that are still existing, and the little natural spaces that are still existing in the cities, and how to deal with them. So that's really an area of concern, it seems, for the people who are following it and watching the video, so we can take that into account for the further planning of the conferences. There are a few other comments also from the people watching today, and thank you so much for your presence. One of them is a very practical question about asking if the people that have pre-registered to the conference today, if they will automatically be registered for the next ones. We didn't plan to automatically register to the next conferences, but definitely we plan to invite you to the next conferences. So if you had pre-registered through the Université Paris-Saclay website, you will receive information. And if you didn't, please feel free to leave your contacts in the chat so that we can call you, we can contact you later. And then there's another question also that's more specific to Coyote Valley. And people are asking whether in Coyote Valley, do you make it compulsory? Do you compel farmers to do certain types of crops or certain types of farming, or is it free? Can the farmers do whatever type of farmings they want? And what is the relationship between the farming practices and the sustainability of the lands? That's a question that we had on the chat. I don't know if Andrea, you feel like Andrea always, because you know the area well. So if one of you feels like answering this question.
Well, I can give a partial answer anyway. You know, this Coyote Valley area produces about 60% of the agricultural economy for the whole county, and so it's really important. There's a great variety of crops grown, but we do know that a lot of the lands are in a kind of a holding pattern. Landowners have planted hay principally, which is not a high value crop in anticipation of development. And so what we want to do is work on a voluntary basis with farmers and lessees, because much of the land is leased, it's not owned, to start some of these pilot projects on agricultural lands and interest farmers and tenant farmers in some of these new practices. So there's nothing compulsory or there's no regulation required about what you can grow in Coyote Valley, but we want to make this transition to more regenerative agriculture. And I would say, as we acquire more land, we call it site control. We want to partner with innovative farmers in a discrete area in Coyote Valley to create a regenerative agricultural area and work with the state on that.
Thank you so much. I think that was a clear answer to the question that was asked. I don't know if some other speakers want to give additional thoughts to the discussions we had and the further planning of the conferences, but we really want to encourage everybody to provide their contributions and their ideas for the follow-up. We will share with you in the chat an email address that you can write to if you want to engage a little bit further in the discussion. And your presence tonight was really important to us. I want to leave a last opportunity to the speakers if they want to say last word before we conclude the evening for tonight. Before we conclude the discussion for tonight, sorry, and then provide more information about the next steps.
Dorian, I have just two comments. One is, in the first track that you're looking at for subsequent webinar and land use policy, I would like to encourage that we perhaps look at some examples where NGOs and universities and others are looking at scenario planning for more efficient use of land and what the outcomes are in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and climate goals. And then the other question or comment I had, maybe for Paul or others, is what international conferences, including the conference in Glasgow in October, are opportunities to raise the profile of the work that we're doing here?
So
yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Just really quickly, not that everybody here can get themselves over to China, but there will be the Conference of the Parties for Biodiversity in China, but more locally for those of us in France, and if travel will be permit, there's the International Union on Conservation of Nature, big get together in principle this year. We hope that they can actually do that. That's going to be focusing on biodiversity issues as well. And anybody who wants to participate at that, they can. So I think those are some of the really big international possibilities to do that. Keeping in mind that at Glasgow or in some of these other conferences, they're really, really big things. And we're just real tiny fish in a big pond.
And regarding the land planning tools, your first question, Andrea, if I got it right, there's actually, it's interesting because it ties into two things we were planning to address a little further in the conferences. One of the land planning tools now is about zero net artificialization of soil, zero net urbanization of soil. And the interesting thing is that it actually comes from the biodiversity concern. And that's one of the things we want to show in the next conferences, is that general strategic orientations that have been taken actually at the European level, trickle down at the national level of France, in France, and then are interpreted in a way that the legislator really encourages the strong, strict protection of land and non-urbanization of land. And then coming from the greenhouse gases emissions level, actually the action is more put at the stakeholders level now, and especially on the farms. And there's a whole a setup and a whole policy that has been developed by the French government after COP21 with a low carbon strategy that is now declinated in very concrete procedures and methodologies by agricultural sectors. And every agricultural sector defines its own carbon counting methodology, and sets up audit systems to check that the farmers who want to engage in some carbon reduction processes actually do fit in the frame that has been set. And so it's a very exciting moment, because we've waited quite a few years, and now the first methodologies are actually out, and we're really entering this implementation phase. So we're really at a turning point, and it's very interesting also to see that some of the things we expected to be really meaningful in terms of carbon sequestration are not maybe that much, and some others are actually working like this. And there's also the fact that we shouldn't really look only at the carbon sequestration aspect. Like, for instance, when you plant trees, and especially the small trees on the side of the farms, you don't actually store that much of carbon from the very beginning. But if you combine it with the other ecosystem services that these bring, then you reach a very interesting results. And well, the idea is not to dig in now into the full conferences, so I will maybe stop here. We could talk very long on that, but I think that's one of the very interesting, some of the very interesting examples that we have about combining these different ecosystem services together. I don't know if there's some more comments or feedbacks from our speakers and ideas for the future. And anyways, otherwise we'll come back to things. I see there's a number of people that are raising the topic of transportation and land preservation. How does it go together? Because transportation is often an interface zone between farming land and urbanized land, because it breaches between urbanized lands, and so in between it goes through farming land. So that's often a question that comes that has come a number of times in the chat. I don't know if any one of you want to comment on that, but otherwise, well, I think we're heading towards the end of the day. A last chance maybe for some of you to speak, and then we'll conclude for today.
Dorian, I would just say the participant who had the question about the train and the concern about that, if they want to get in touch with us, they can. We've been in negotiations with the California High-Speed Rail Authority about high-speed rail service through the Coyote Valley. We've been working very closely with the Nature Conservancy on this, and TNC has also done a lot of really good work linking conservation to transportation. So we can talk about that, Carrie, maybe a little bit more in the upcoming webinars.
And that's clearly a huge issue on in the whole southern Paris region, where the urban pressure is just really making it very difficult for farmers to move from one field to another, and where the building of new linear infrastructure is really problematic. In particular, the metro that was being talked about, but all new linear infrastructure is really very problematic in terms of fragmenting landscapes, both farming landscapes and natural.
Louise, Carrie, is there anything else you'd like to share before we close for today, or Romain?
I'd just like to thank you for all you've done, Dorian, to make this happen. What started out as a sort of a bad example of COVID impacts has turned into something that's really quite exciting. So thank you.
Clara?
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting discussion. Glad to be a part of it.
And I don't know, Romain, if you want to add anything before we finish.
No, just I'm very excited to follow the next conference about land use planning.
Follow, participate, maybe. Okay. Yeah, that was really that's actually a great adventure that's starting tonight. That we had thought of and designed with all of the people that have been here tonight since quite some months. And we're really excited about the response also, and we're really grateful for all the people that have joined this webinar, because we didn't know what to expect when we started this, and to have more than 300 of you connected a very long part of the evening and the day today was really great feedback. So that's really encouraging for us for the future. So yeah, these subjects, they're of course of really high importance for the future, and that's a very exciting adventure that's opening today. And the first conference will definitely take place before the summer. We don't want to take fixed engagement as of dates, but you will receive the information if you were pre-registered on the Université Paris-Saclay website for these events. And if you didn't pre-register for these events, you can either leave your contact in the chat, or if you want to avoid that, which is completely understandable, you can write to the email address that has been provided in the chat, which is web.resilience @université_Paris and Saclay.fr. This email address is dedicated to the project, and that will allow us to follow up with you on the matter and keep on the discussion going. It will probably take us a little bit of time to answer if you provide like detailed contents and question, but please be patient, and we're coming back with some more content and keep the discussion going. Thanks a lot to everybody, and looking forward to seeing you soon. And don't hesitate to communicate further with us for the future. And really, really heartfelt thanks to all the speakers, Andrea, Louise, Carrie, Natalie, Paul, Romain, Caroline, who have taken so much time to prepare all of this. A special thanks to Fabrice also, who has, I think, done a really great job in facilitating the conference, and a special thoughts to EIT Climate-KIC, who's been funding the starting work that allows us to be here, and all the amazing staff of Université Paris-Saclay who have arranged for the whole communications of the event and everything. Thank you so much, and see you very soon.
Thank you, Dorian.